Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Lucas Bray. I'm 31 years old, and until last night I was the night desk clerk at the Fairview Renaissance Hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. I didn't have military training, I wasn't a prepper, and I'd never even been in a proper fight before. But when the first wave of infected hit the city, I had exactly 12 hours to figure out how to stay alive and who I could trust. The Fairview was a mid-rise business hotel near Grant Street and 6th Avenue, about a block from the old U.S. Steel Tower and half a mile from Point State Park. I worked the graveyard shift 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which meant I mostly dealt with flight crews, truckers, and the occasional drunk wedding guest stumbling in after midnight. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to cover my rent on a tiny studio in Bloomfield and my monthly payments on a used Corolla. That night, the night it all started, was a slow Tuesday in early October. It had been unseasonably warm all week, and a sticky haze hung over the city. I remember the smell of wet pavement after the afternoon rain. The Pirates had lost again. Traffic was light, and a few guests were still lingering in the lobby bar as I clocked in. The first sign something was wrong came around 12:47 a.m. A call came in from room 1412. The guest was a nurse named Allison Eng, here from Columbus for a cardiology conference at UPMC Mercy. She sounded shaken. "There's a man in the hallway," she said, her voice tight. "He's just standing there, banging his head against the wall." I checked the lobby camera feeds. 14 was one of the older floors, carpeted, dimly lit, always a little creepy when empty. I flipped to the hallway feed and spotted the figure. Male, mid-40s, wearing a dark gray t-shirt soaked through with sweat. He was pressing his forehead against the wallpaper and thudding it rhythmically against the drywall. I watched for a full 30 seconds. He didn't say anything, just kept banging his head over and over, slow and mechanical. "Okay," I told Allison, trying to keep my voice calm. "Stay in your room, lock the door, I'll call security." By protocol, I buzzed our night security guard, Carl. He was a retired cop in his late 50s who liked to boast about his days on the narcotics squad. He'd handled everything from drunk football fans to armed domestic disputes in the past. When I told him about the guy on 14, he grumbled something about bath salts and took the service elevator up. I kept watching the feed. Carl stepped into frame a minute later, approaching the man cautiously. He held a flashlight in one hand and kept his free hand near his belt. No gun, just a radio and a canister of pepper spray. He said something I couldn't hear the audio, but Carl looked calm, professional. Then the man turned. His face was a mess. Dried blood crusted his upper lip, his jaw hung slack like it had been broken and reset wrong. And his eyes, they were glazed, unfocused, but there was something behind them. Hunger, or madness. He lunged. Carl tried to backpedal, but the man caught him by the collar. I watched in mute horror as the two went down hard. Carl struggled, pushed, kicked. The man didn't even flinch. He was biting Carl's neck, not just biting, tearing into it like raw meat. I was frozen. For a second, I thought it had to be fake, a drug freakout, maybe a meth head gone psychotic. But when Carl's arms stopped moving, something primal in my brain flipped. I slammed the panic button under the desk, locking down the elevators and alerting 911. That was when the phone lines cut out. 1 second, I was on hold with emergency dispatch. The next, dead silence. I tried my cell, no signal. The hotel's Wi-Fi flickered, then vanished. All 5 lobby TVs switched to static. Every news channel, every input. Gone. I pulled up the other security feeds. Chaos. Floor 11, a woman in a bathrobe being dragged screaming into a stairwell. Floor 9, someone stumbling through the hallway, half naked, covered in blood. The bar camera showed 2 patrons pinned under a table, fighting off what looked like the bartender, who was gnawing at one of their arms like an animal. I heard the elevator doors ding. I ducked instinctively, heart thundering. They shouldn't have opened, I had locked them, but the panel behind the desk showed manual override. Someone had triggered the emergency key. I grabbed the fire axe from behind the reception counter, old, red-handled, standard safety equipment, and backed toward the maintenance hall. The elevator opened. Carl stepped out. His uniform was soaked in blood. One eye dangled from the socket. His lips were torn open, and a long flap of his scalp hung like wet cloth, but he was walking. Not limping, not dragging. He saw me. He opened his mouth. A gurgle came out, not words, more like wet concrete bubbling through a pipe. I ran. I didn't think. I bolted through the staff hallway, past the kitchen, through the laundry room. I heard doors slam open behind me, furniture crashing. Not just one set of footsteps now, more. Dozens. The fire alarm didn't work. The breakers in the service room were unresponsive. The whole building was going dark. I burst out the back exit into the alley. The air outside was thick and strange, like ozone after a lightning strike. Somewhere nearby, I heard screams, gunshots. A distant explosion, probably a transformer blowing. The city skyline was flickering. Fires dotted the upper levels of buildings. Sirens wailed in every direction. Then I saw a figure moving in the alley. It was a young woman, barefoot, blood smeared across her tank top. She held a tire iron in one hand and stared at me like a wild animal. "Are you bit?" she shouted. "No," I gasped. "I worked here. And they went crazy. They killed Carl." She sprinted past me and shoved the door shut behind me, jamming a rebar through the handle. "My name's Jenna," she said breathlessly. "Come on, we have to get off the street." We ran across the alley and through a loading dock that connected to the convention center garage. Inside, it was dim and humid, but temporarily quiet. A few battered SUVs were parked near the loading bays, one with its lights still on and engine idling. "Is this happening everywhere?" I asked, still trying to catch my breath. Jenna nodded. "Started near Shadyside. I was in a lift, going home from work. Saw someone bite a cop at the corner of Center and Negley. By the time we hit the Bloomfield Bridge, cars were flipping. I ran. I think it's some kind of pathogen, spreads fast, bites, maybe even scratches." We ducked behind a concrete support pillar as a pair of figures limped across the far end of the garage. Neither of us moved. The figures sniffed the air, paused, then wandered away. "They don't always see you," she whispered. "But if you make noise—" We waited until the sound of their footsteps faded, then crawled over to the SUV. The keys were in the ignition, and the tank was nearly full. We didn't argue. We got in and started driving. The streets were chaos. Fires in the south side. People dragging themselves across bridges. Police barricades abandoned. On the Fort Pitt Bridge, we had to swerve around a flaming SEPTA bus. Jenna kept the wheel steady while I scanned the streets for movement. "We can't go home," she said. "We need somewhere defensible. High ground, strong walls, doors that lock from the inside." I thought fast. The old county jail on Ross Street. It was converted into a data center. Fenced in, solid walls, only one entrance. She nodded, turning hard onto Forbes. We hit 70 miles per hour passing the Duquesne campus, the golden dome of the courthouse glowing behind a cloud of smoke. The road was littered with debris, trash bins, a toppled rental scooter, A smashed sedan with its airbag hanging limp through a cracked windshield. Somewhere beyond the hill, sirens screamed like they were being dragged into the sky and torn apart. We drove past Chatham Square, heading toward Ross Street. I kept glancing at the rearview mirrors. It was still hard to tell how far the outbreak had spread, how fast it had moved. Pittsburgh's grid wasn't designed for smooth evacuation. One collapsed bus or jackknifed semi on a bridge could shut down an entire quadrant. That was probably already happening across the city. Every tunnel, every bridge, every ramp had become a bottleneck. The old Allegheny County Jail loomed ahead in the haze. They'd turned the main building into a private tech contractor's office about a decade ago, but the bones were still all 19th century fortress. Granite walls, narrow windows, and a courtyard wrapped in 10-foot security fencing. I used to park near there sometimes when the hotel garage was full. That's why I remembered the entrance. A single motorized gate off Ross and 2nd Avenue, with a secondary keypad access point by the pedestrian gate. Jenna pulled up just short of the main drive. The big steel gate was open a few feet, probably for someone trying to evacuate earlier and leaving it in manual mode. The outer floodlights were still running, buzzing faintly in the muggy air. She coasted the SUV behind the fence line and killed the engine. We sat in silence for a moment. The city felt wrong. Too quiet in some directions, too loud in others. Somewhere on Grant Street, glass shattered in a rhythm that wasn't accidental. Helicopters beat overhead, low and fast. A massive plume of smoke rolled behind the PPG Place spires. Inside the jail-turned data center, it was darker than I expected. Emergency exit lights ran dim orange strips along the baseboards. Jenna and I crept through the staff entrance, which was unlocked. Someone had clearly left in a hurry. A chair was toppled. A half-eaten sandwich lay smashed on the floor, and a duffel bag with a company badge attached sat abandoned by the front security desk. I checked it out of instinct. It belonged to someone named M. Connors Network Admin. Inside were a company ID, a flashlight, a half-dead iPhone, and a metal multi-tool. I pocketed the flashlight and tool. Jenna grabbed the ID, figuring it might help us bypass any inner doors. We moved past. The central corridor was empty, a flickering eye. G5 Cyber Infrastructure sign lit the hallway like a broken neon bar. Most of the building's interior had been gutted and restructured for servers. Glass security rooms, temperature-controlled vaults, locked fiber access points. But the upper floors, the old wings, still held dorm-style rooms and staircases with thick fire doors. That's where we headed. We weren't looking for bandwidth. We wanted walls and blind spots. We chose a second-floor admin room overlooking the gate. It had reinforced glass and a deadbolt on the door. Jenna dragged in an old supply cabinet and wedged it against the entrance for added security. I checked the side windows. No movement on the street yet, just flashes of orange light dancing off the alleys. For the moment, we were safe. Then we heard a dull thump from below. I froze, listening, another thump, then a dragging sound, flesh on concrete. Jenna mouthed something at me, but I didn't catch it. We killed the flashlight and held our breath. The footsteps were heavy, uncoordinated. Not like a runner, more like someone injured but determined. Then the sound of something scraping against metal, a boot, a pipe. The echo in the stairwell made it impossible to tell how far the sound carried. I held the axe in both hands, tipped down, leaning against the metal cabinet. Jenna had the tire iron tucked into the crook of her arm. We waited in silence. Eventually, the noise stopped. 10 minutes passed, then 20. We stayed absolutely still. It wasn't bravery, it was survival instinct. When you know the world doesn't make sense anymore, the safest choice is often doing nothing at all. Waiting, listening. trusting the silence more than your panic. Around 4:10 a.m., the darkness outside was cut by moving headlights. A box truck turned onto Ross Street, its engine coughing badly, and rolled to a stop outside the jail gate. We peered down from the window. The side of the truck read Iron Mountain Document Destruction Services. A man climbed out, tall, balding, wearing a maintenance uniform. He held a shotgun low against his leg, scanning the fence line. Another figure emerged from the passenger side, a woman with a ponytail, holding what looked like a crowbar and a compact med kit. "We can try to signal them," I whispered. "They might be infected," Jenna whispered back. "No sign of wounds. They're not staggering. They moved with purpose." She nodded reluctantly. "All right, but slowly." We cracked the window and used a hand mirror from the desk to reflect light down toward them. After a few attempts, the woman noticed and nudged the man. He raised both hands in the air, showing he wasn't holding the weapon aggressively. "We saw your light," he called. "You in the building?" Jenna answered, "Yes, you clean?" "No bites. We came from Greenfield, got pushed east when the parkway choked up, looking for shelter." Jenna looked at me. I nodded. She pulled the bolt and eased the front access door open. Together, we crept downstairs, axe and tire iron at the ready. We let them in through the service entrance after a brief check. No wounds, no blood. They were shaking from exhaustion but lucid. The man's name was Dale. He worked for the facilities team at CMU, said he and the woman, Teresa, had been trying to get to a friend's house near Mount Washington when they got surrounded. Lost their original vehicle near Bates Street. Dale had grabbed the Iron Mountain truck from a lot where he used to do maintenance. "Been driving in circles since midnight," he said. "South Side's overrun. Oakland's half burnt. Pitt's campus looks like a war zone. We saw 2 choppers go down near the cathedral." Teresa pulled out a folded map. "We need to think long term," she said. "If this is spreading citywide, we need fuel, food, and info. Cell towers are overloaded. We need a shortwave." "I've got a crank radio in my apartment," I said. "Bloomfield, just off Liberty. It's old school, but it can pick up NOAA and some local bands." "That's over 5 miles on foot," Dale said. "Every block's a risk." "I left my car parked near William Penn," I added. "But we'll never reach it. Whole area was already swarming by midnight." Jenna pointed to the truck. "We get a second vehicle, smaller, quieter. Something that doesn't scream elude me. Then we go." By 5 a.m., we had our first objective. Reach a secondary vehicle, locate shortwave access, and find a rooftop with visibility. We needed to know if there was a quarantine zone, an evac point, anything. We split for supplies. Teresa found a utility closet with batteries, flares, gloves, and a toolkit. Jenna found an emergency food bin, a leftover from the data center's continuity planning. Mostly MREs and water pouches, but better than nothing. Dale, always practical, located the main HVAC maintenance room and pulled a short crowbar, 2 respirator masks, and a spool of heavy-duty zip ties. I took inventory as they piled it all onto a metal cart near the server room stairwell. Time was slipping. It was already 5:35 a.m., and we had less than 90 minutes before sunrise. That meant shadows would get shorter, movement easier to spot for both us and whatever was still lurking out there. Our immediate plan was to find a smaller, more maneuverable vehicle. The Iron Mountain truck was solid but conspicuous, painted with bright corporate logos and dragging a shredded rear bumper that made too much noise. We needed something nimble, reliable, ideally with a full tank and no alarm system that would alert every infected thing within 5 blocks. Jenna suggested checking the delivery lot across from Smithfield Street, near the back of a coffee distribution warehouse. She'd jogged past it on morning runs before, and remembered that some drivers left their vans parked with keys and hidden lockboxes or even on the visor. It wasn't a great plan, but it was the best we had. We packed up the essentials: one duffel bag of food, another with tools and batteries, and a third with water. I carried the axe slung through a loop I'd made from a decommissioned server cable. Jenna took point with the tire iron, while Dale carried the shotgun, a pump-action Mossberg 500 he'd found under the front seat of the Iron Mountain cab. Teresa handled the maps, and the only radio we had, an old Baofeng UV5R with a cracked display but still capable of scanning VHF-UHF channels. It was better than nothing. We moved out through the rear emergency exit and crept down Ross Street, keeping low and close to walls. The air outside had thickened into a foul mix of ash, exhaust, and something sour I couldn't quite place, like stagnant water and rotting meat. The temperature had dropped too. Not drastically, but enough to fog our breath. My phone, long since dead, had stopped trying to reconnect to anything. It just displayed a frozen SOS indicator beside the time. The towers were gone or overloaded, or someone had killed them intentionally. The city was unrecognizable. Trash fires burned in metal barrels near the Mellon Square garage, casting flickering shadows that stretched like reaching fingers across the brick walls. Some buildings had shattered glass fronts. Others had metal shutters half closed, abandoned in panic. We passed a flipped delivery van on Liberty Avenue with one door swinging open, the cabin empty, save for a streak of what looked like blood smeared across the steering wheel. No bodies, no movement. But it was clear something terrible had come through this part of town. At the corner of Smithfield and Strawberry Way, we stopped cold. Ahead of us, in the loading lot Jenna had mentioned, were 3 vehicles. 2 boxy Ford Transits and a white Chevy Express van, all parked against a chain-link fence. One had a pallet jack still wedged beneath its bumper. The lot gate was open, and leaning against the front of the Chevy was a man. At least it looked like a man. He wasn't moving. His clothes were soaked in something dark, and one of his shoes was missing. His skin had a waxy tone, his arms limp at his sides, and his head tilted too far to the left like his neck was barely supporting the weight. We crouched behind a dumpster and watched for almost 5 minutes. He didn't budge. Teresa whispered, "We need to assume the worst. I think he's dormant. Maybe noise wakes them." I whispered back, "If he hasn't seen us yet, we move silent. No metal on metal. Stay low, don't rush." Dale chambered a shell but didn't lift the weapon. We crept through the fence gap and around the back of the lot. Jenna checked the first transit side door locked. The second, same story. I moved to the Chevy and spotted the keys dangling from the ignition. I tapped the door latch gently. Unlocked. We were in. The fuel gauge read 3/4. The tires looked intact. There was a blanket stuffed under the passenger seat and an emergency roadside kit in the back. I gave a thumbs up to the others. Jenna moved toward the driver's side while I slid into the rear to double-check the cargo area. That's when I heard the groan. It started low like a breath from somewhere deep in a flooded cave, then another, behind the dumpster, then, far worse, the wet scrape of something dragging across gravel. Dale shouted, "Move!" The man against the van jerked upright like a puppet on strings. His eyes rolled toward us, milky and shining, and his jaw unhinged far too wide. He didn't walk. He lunged. Jenna kicked the door closed just as he hit it face first, leaving a greasy smear of fluid and saliva on the glass. Teresa dove into the passenger seat, screaming for us to go. 2 more emerged from behind a nearby delivery trailer. One of them was a woman, or had been. Her chest was torn open and bones jutted from the wound like jagged glass. She clawed at the van, scratching down the metal with nails blackened and cracked. The third slammed into the back bumper, rocking the entire vehicle. I shouted for Dale. He was behind us, still outside, raising the shotgun. He fired a blast of light and sound that echoed down Smithfield like a cannon. The nearest attacker's head snapped back. It didn't explode, but the force dropped it hard. Dale yanked the rear door open and scrambled inside. I jumped into the front as Jenna gunned the ignition. The Chevy roared to life, and she peeled out in reverse, crushing the first infected beneath the wheels. It didn't stop moving, but the limbs crumpled inward like folding chairs. We tore through the alley, took a hard left down Oliver Avenue, and didn't stop until we reached the overpass by the Liberty Bridge. There, in the shadow of the ramp, we parked and tried to breathe. Jenna stared at the wheel, her knuckles white. Dale checked the shells left in his side pouch 4 plus 1 in the chamber. Teresa sat against the door, holding the radio tight to her chest. "We can't keep running from every encounter," she said quietly. "We need shelter, somewhere elevated. Rooftop access, visibility." I remembered the Morse code flashes from the Mellon Center. Someone's alive in the BNY Mellon building. Top floors. They were signaling SOS around 5 a.m. Jenna looked up. "That's 2 blocks from here. From Grant and 5th. We cut through Mellon Square. If we're careful, it's doable." The problem was obvious: getting up the tower. The BNY Mellon Center was the tallest building in Pittsburgh, 55 floors. Most elevators wouldn't be working, and stairwells would be death traps if they were blocked or flooded with infected. But if someone was already broadcasting from up there, they'd had time to secure at least one route to the top. We moved again, slower this time, pushing the van behind a line of abandoned rideshare cars near the back of the Duquesne Club. From there, we went on foot silent, coordinated, only whispering when absolutely necessary. The Mellon Square entrance was partially blocked by an overturned municipal utility cart, but we found a side path through a cracked marble planter. Glass crunched beneath our boots despite our best efforts. Ahead, the main lobby's revolving doors stood half-shattered, one panel flapping in the wind. Inside was devastation. Desks overturned, lobby furniture smashed, a pile of suitcases abandoned near the concierge counter. One elevator shaft had been pried open, the car itself was halfway up, frozen between floors. Blood smeared the interior walls like brushstrokes. We found the stairwell at the northwest corner. Jenna opened the door slowly. It was dark, but quiet. I led the way, axe in hand, 1 foot at a time. We passed floor after floor. No movement, no sound. The air inside the stairwell was thick and stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in days instead of hours. It reeked of industrial cleaner, metal, and something else, sour and sharp, like mildewed rags soaked in old sweat. Our boots echoed slightly on the concrete steps, so we moved as gently as possible, keeping to the edge of each tread where the sound was softest. We were on the 18th floor when the man's voice called down from above. "You're not bit?" he asked again, his tone urgent but steady. "No," I said. 4 of us, coming up now." "Then move, fast as you can. Lockdown hits at 6. We didn't hesitate. By now, the gray light of dawn had started to creep through the narrow, reinforced windows lining the outer wall of the stairwell. It gave everything a bleached, colorless tone, halfway between visibility and nightmare. We kept climbing, passing more empty landings, most marked with department names we barely registered. Corporate law offices, accounting firms, data architecture firms. Every floor was another reminder of what had existed just hours ago. Another echo of normal life that had cracked like glass under the weight of the outbreak. By the time we reached the 42nd floor, we were soaked in sweat. Jenna's arm was trembling from gripping the tire iron too tightly, and Dale's breathing had become ragged despite his solid frame. Teresa was the worst off. Clutching the radio in one hand, she staggered the last few steps, and I had to grab her elbow to stop her from collapsing. We paused briefly under a flickering emergency light. The man with the rifle met us there, his expression hard but not unfriendly. He looked like he'd been awake for days. Sunken cheeks, a scruffy beard and dark rings under his eyes. He wore a black tactical vest with a paramedic patch stitched onto one shoulder and a nameplate that read S. Richter. His rifle was a civilian-grade AR-15, modified with a flashlight underbarrel mount and an old EO Tech sight taped in place. Not standard military issue, more like a hobbyist's gun, repurposed in desperation. "Richter," he said. "We got 8 survivors secured on the roof and 1 more on the comms floor. There's a storm shelter access hatch up there, built when they reinforced this place for server redundancy, 1 way in or out. You'll be safe." He didn't wait for introductions, just turned and motioned for us to follow. We ascended 3 more levels, then passed through a heavy security door into what had once been the executive floor. The contrast was jarring. Carpeting muffled our footsteps, and the air here was cooler, artificially conditioned by the building's emergency systems. Several of the offices had been stripped of furniture and lined with canned goods, bottled water, and boxes of electrical equipment. Someone had laid down cords for solar-powered battery chargers, rigged to panels mounted on the exterior windows. It wasn't just shelter, it was organization. On the roof, the sunlight was just cresting the ridgeline east of the city. A low bank of smoke rolled off the Monongahela, casting long shadows over the streets below. From this height, we could see dozens of fires burning across Oakland, Bloomfield, and the Strip District. Flashing lights marked an overturned fire truck near the hot metal bridge. Somewhere near Heinz Field, we spotted a helicopter, possibly military, circling low, then veering off as smoke obscured its path. The chaos wasn't contained. If anything, it had spread wider, faster, and deeper than we had realized. The rooftop was reinforced with a small weather shelter and a communications antenna array that looked like it had been patched together from both official equipment and salvaged parts. Coax cables ran in careful loops into a large junction box, which was wired into a makeshift comms panel bolted to the side of the rooftop elevator enclosure. A wiry man in his 50s sat in front of it, adjusting dials and speaking into a radio mic. He wore a lanyard that read Pittsburgh Amateur Radio Club and greeted us without turning his head. "Name's Glenn," he said. "Been trying to raise Cleveland, Philly, Harrisburg, anywhere. Most of what's out there is just static and screams. But I've been bouncing signals off the ionosphere since 2 a.m. You're welcome to listen." He stepped aside and pointed to a nearby folding chair. I took the headset and sat down, trying to tune my ears to the mixture of white noise and fragmented voices. After a minute, I caught something. Faint, distant, but unmistakably human. "Evac point, Route 28 North. Backup at Tarentum Bridge. Priority for medical and law enforcement." I sat upright. "That's real. That's a broadcast." Glenn nodded grimly. It was stronger half an hour ago. Whoever was transmitting had good range, but either their power's dropping or the antenna took a hit. If it's real, it means someone is organizing outside the metro. Maybe a staging point, maybe a quarantine line. Teresa leaned in. "That's due northeast. That means going straight through Lawrenceville, then across the river." Jenna didn't like that. Lawrenceville was already in bad shape when I passed through. Narrow streets, too many old buildings, too many blind corners. Dale pulled out the city map and spread it on the rooftop HVAC unit. "We'll need a larger vehicle for the distance, something that can carry food, fuel, and medical. If we make for the Strip and follow Smallman Street out, we could pick up Route 28 just before Etna. That route keeps us close to the river, open line of sight. Richter, the man with the rifle, frowned. I lost 2 trying to do that 3 hours ago. The 31st Street Bridge was half blocked, and someone was dragging debris to trap vehicles. If you go, you need a scout. We fell silent for a moment. I knew what was coming next. We'd survived this long by luck, timing, and a few desperate choices. But getting out of downtown, across the Allegheny, and into whatever was left of the evacuation perimeter would take more than that. It would take cooperation and a willingness to risk everything again. There wasn't another option. Staying on the roof was a temporary reprieve. Eventually, supplies would run out, signals would fade, and the infected would adapt. Movement was the only chance we had. Richter volunteered to go with us. He wasn't military, but he had training. Former tactical paramedic for Allegheny EMS before funding cuts pushed him into private event security. He knew how to move in an urban environment and read terrain. He took point as we descended the tower again, this time moving with purpose, sweeping corners and making calculated advances instead of raw flight. By 7:45 a.m., we reached the Chevy Express van again. Miraculously, it was untouched. Either the infected had moved on, or the noise of our earlier encounter had driven them elsewhere. We loaded supplies fast and mapped out the route to Smallman Street. The plan was to reach the Strip, scavenge for a larger vehicle if possible, and get onto Route 28 before the bridges were cut off or barricaded by others. Desperate survivors, or worse, rogue groups trying to claim territory. The city had changed in just 12 hours. Fires now raged openly across multiple districts, and we passed 2 National Guard transport trucks that had been overturned and stripped. In one alley near Penn Avenue, we spotted a group of civilians, maybe 6 or 7, dragging makeshift shields and sticks through a barricade of dumpsters and furniture. They watched us pass in silence, distrustful, too tired or uncertain to act. Crossing through the Strip district, we passed Dianoia's Eatery, its front door wide open and interior dark. We spotted movement inside, too erratic to be human. We didn't stop. It wasn't until we reached the old Buncher building near 21st Street that we got what we needed. A delivery truck still idling behind a fenced loading dock, keys in the ignition, its engine humming like a miracle. It was a modified Ford F450 with an extended cargo bed and dual tanks. Inside the cab were 2 walkie-talkies, a first aid kit, and a half-eaten breakfast sandwich that was still warm. We moved fast, transferred supplies, confirmed the fuel level nearly full. It would get us out of the city and up 28 without needing to stop. Glenn stayed behind with 3 others, keeping the radio alive and the signal steady. We left Pittsburgh behind as the sun rose higher, casting harsh gold across the hollowed streets. We passed the 40th Street Bridge, already blocked by twisted metal and a burned-out city bus. We veered onto Route 28, tires thumping over debris, wind pushing back the rising stink of decay and fire. Just after the Sharpsburg ramp, we saw a hastily painted sign stretched across the overhead truss in black lettering. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.